ESP.bet. Watch and bet live.
Okay, this is episode 7 of League's Next World Champion. Usual duo, host and co-host here, but we've got another guest. We've persuaded someone else to come into the Lion's Den, and this is Cabramaravilla, who's a guy who I had on Narrative Wake. He was talking about, was that EULCS that we did? I think it was, right?
That's right.
Yes, because that was the episode where we found out that Kelsey Moser cannot in fact be objective. So I don't know why that's a surprise to anyone. I've always said the best content creators are not objective, they are biased, but the key is they try to inform their biases. So if you let everyone know up front what teams you like and what you like in the game, there's actually no problem with it at all. Anyone who says that you have to be unbiased almost always is someone with no background in journalism, unsurprisingly. It's weird how that works. So, in the interest of not being at all unbiased, just being biased, I don't know why I said not being unbiased. That's like a fucking riot way to do it. Something. We're not unbiased. It's like, all right. So, in the interest of that, let's just start here. So, the massive game that we hadn't gotten to in last week's schedule when we did the show was number 1 versus number 2. It was Kingzone versus Afreeca Freecs. And obviously, Afreeca Freecs is a team that we're definitely going to be talking about a lot on this episode. They've actually played 3 series since we did the last one. So let's just start there. So Kingzone played Afreeca. It was a 2-1 series, but Kingzone did win the series. What do you think about, did you watch this series, Cabra? It was at the end of last week.
I think I did, but I'm actually not sure. I'm checking because I've watched so many LCK games since I wanted to come here that everything is kind of a soup in my mind.
Right, start us off then, Emily. Let's jump into it. What happened in this game? Obviously, everyone won a game at least.
Yeah, I think so. Afreeca got game 1. I think it was the Spirit. It was kind of a weird game. It was the Spirit Skarner game with Peanut on Jax and Prey on Ezreal. It was kind of, so I'm trying to jog my memory as well, actually, so it seems like forever ago. But if I remember correctly, Kingzone were ahead for the majority of it before Afreeca came back. So across the series, from what I recall, I just remember Afreeca seemed really just not at the same level as
people said that
what Kingzone
both teams were a bit underwhelming, right? I mean, you think when you see the matchup, this could be the best game.
I just remember, I think it was game 2 that was just like an absolute shit show, kind of, where like, oh, you know what it was? This was the series that reminded me, okay, now I'm remembering. This is the series that reminded me of the Kespa Cup finals.
Right.
Between KT and this same team of Kingzone, which was still Longzhu, I think, back then. But it was basically like both teams just kind of trying to outdo each other, trying to like one-up each other, going for some really weird skirmishes that weren't necessarily like advantageous or had correct vision behind them or setup or anything like that. It just reminded me of kind of, you know, you put 2 teams in a pit and then they just fight each other. And I think you saw a lot of that in this series, especially with like the final game. You have like the BDD, they pull out like the classic Kingzone comp where you have like BDD Talia, you have Gorilla Tom Kench with Kalista. They played Cuz on Jax.
He did the classic move where if your jungler loses game 1, he just doesn't get to play anymore. So that in itself is worth discussing. Like, what did you think of this bringing Cuz back into the lineup? I mean, did it seem like Peanut was part of the problem in game 1?
I mean, I think Peanut still has some synergy issues with BDD specifically. I also think that Peanut, it's a bit like what we saw in I want to say the first ever series I saw this Kingzone team play, where it's like really minute things where he'll go for an invade or he'll try to do something and he won't have set up with BDD what he wants to do. Whereas like oddly enough, I feel like BDD is very comfortable playing with Cuz because he was basically jungling for Cuz at times last year, right? So it's a bit weird. I don't know what is going on with that like communication, but I thought that was a bit weird. This was the first game I think in Korea where we saw the double banner of command also with the Scion and Ornn that started in LPL, if I remember correctly, with Zoom, which is always, I mean, I kind of find it hilarious, but always a fun time to watch like two top laners just build banner and like send their minions against each other. So it's kind of, I don't know, it was a very weird series. It was a lot sloppier than I thought it would be. Like I went in to this being like, yes, we're going to see the two best teams in Korea fight each other. And then came out of it being like, wow, like the two best teams in Korea aren't that good. Which obviously I don't actually think that's the case, but I definitely don't think this series showcased the best of these two teams on either side.
Right, so Cabra, just before this, and this is on the last show we did, Kingzone had finally lost like a legit series. Because you remember the storyline was they lost the opening series of the season, but that was when Khan was suspended and they had to use the sub. And then they'd won 14 games in a row. They'd won all the best of 3 series. And then they did lose the first game of that streak with Khan in, but that was when he then went out for game 2 and said he was like hyperventilating or something. He didn't play the rest of the series and they lost to BBQ. So then they come back. This is like the big marquee game. Obviously, everyone wants to see number 1 versus number 2. And then after that, they've got MVP who they just beat. And then after that, they're playing Kongdu Monsters. So they basically have like an easy week now. So the big question is this. They did just beat number 2. Admittedly, not great games. They did lose to BBQ. And even though you have to put the asterisk of, they didn't have one of their best players, they did for the first game they lost. So here's the question. Since Kingzone was actually flying in what you'd say in English, like such rarefied air, they were actually not like, we're talking like historically good levels. Does this plant any concerns in your mind for them as like the number 1 team in Korea, number 1 team in the world?
Sure. I mean, I think like the reason you brought me to the show was because when you made your video on their streak, I was very hesitant to still believe in Kingzone because talking to Peanut's point, for example, I think Peanut is a guy that when he has to maybe decide which path he has to take to alleviate pressure on the map, he is not that smart at deciding the path, and this is a huge issue because he was playing in SKT for a year, which I think they are pretty good at teaching this. So if he doesn't know it by now, he will never know it. I think it was against BBQ that he invaded the blue buff while his mid lane was coming back from a reset, which I don't necessarily like to blame because you can still do it if you're a very good jungler and have a very good sense, but he feeds the blue buff to the mid laner, which I'm still not blaming him. But then when he comes back, he goes through wraiths instead of going through blue buff, and because the mid lane matchup is 2 mages, the prio is usually determined by blue buff. So then BDD gets pushed in, he cannot do anything. BBQ wards, and then they take Drake for sort of quote-unquote free in that scenario because they really shouldn't be. If the blue buff was on BDD, this prio would have never existed for this Drake to happen. So I am not very sold on. I think Peanut is very good. I think mechanically he's excellent, but don't necessarily think that he brings that element of letting the lanes play on their own that maybe the team would be ideal for them. But even I was talking about this point, and then I think the previous meta, when you cannot snowball around bot lane like ever, really, really, really benefited Kingzone Dragon X. I think that they are looking pretty shaky whenever they have to play through their bot lane. They mainly only walk up and down the river and look for skirmishes that the enemy team sort of has to take. So I'm not very sold on them as a number 1 team in the world, but neither I am on Afreeca, so yeah. Right,
okay. So they're still the default number 1, but they're not like a clear-cut, like super scary.
I'm worried about playoffs and meta switches.
Okay. So, Emily, what do you think of that then? Because when he says there that they can't really play through the bot lane, well, if you think about it, okay, these two players in Prey and Gorilla have obviously always been lauded as like best in their roles, like some of the best in the entire world. But if you think about all the teams they've been in over the last few years, like obviously to some degree, the old Rox Tigers used to play through the top lane anyway. And then typically in the long queue, they were amazing when they got to team fights. So is this something that's like makes sense as a flaw there? Do you see that as something that's going to be troublesome as we move out of the past meta?
Yeah, actually, I think if you go all the way back to Worlds and how Samsung, now KSV, defeated Longzhu, now Kingzone, with the one change in the jungle, so they were playing Cuz. They attacked bot side because Kingzone really, really loved to set up topside, and they almost always pad topside with where BDD would focus his pressure for Cuz as well. And they always wanted to get Khan ahead in his lane so then they could send him to a side lane and split pressure on the map. And one thing that I had previously said, like, okay, Kingzone is looking a little bit more diverse with Peanut. Like, you might get to the point where you can have BDD maybe playing a few different things, or having BDD push out mid and then roam bot side and try to focus pressure, like diversify pressure, I guess, on the map. But that hasn't happened as much as I had hoped in the beginning of the season. And I think that is a bit of an issue for Kingzone going forward, especially now that in the current bot lane meta, like for example, the past few games we've seen in Korea, we've seen huge priority on lane dominant champions in the bottom lane and winning bot lane. We saw like this week, we saw tons of Xayah and Rakan. We saw the Leona come out. People are really, really like Kalista, obviously. People are really, really focusing on having kill pressure bot as early as possible now that we've evolved so far beyond the double relic shield BS that started off this split. So I think that is something that Kingzone need to address, despite the fact that I actually still like highly value Prey. And I still think he's the best AD carry in the region currently. I think that is something that this team really needs to look at, and I'm not like, I don't want to guess at why they played Cuz, but if I had to like talk about like Peanut versus Cuz, I do think it's probably for either team communication or like the comfort of BDD. Because Oh no, I was just gonna say, when you think of Peanut, like when he looked best, it was when he had Kuro as a mid laner, and BDD is like, he has some of those like Kuro like qualities, right? Where you're like pushing out the wave and being very efficient. However, he's not at Kuro level with his efficiency and his map awareness, but he's also like, I would argue, still a more like mechanically skilled player. Like he still has a higher potential, higher ceiling to develop than Kuro, in my opinion. But he's still not quite there yet. And so I think if there's another thing that concerns me about this team is that they do feel like they have to put Cuz in, which tells me that they're not going to focus on creating a better mid-jungle synergy between Peanut and BDD and trying to build like a stronger map presence from that.
Okay, I have a question. This is an open question to anyone who wants to answer. So then, one aspect, and this is one of the reasons why when Longju was so good in that last year, because it was just one split, and then they only had to play the finals, and in the finals, arguably, they got the easier team, actually. Like, SK team looked like they just crept past KT there. I really was just like, you can't really know that much about these players yet. They've only played one playoff series. And one thing I've noticed, and I want to get your take on this, is, okay, when everything was going great and the whole team was just rolling, yeah, BDD looked amazing. He probably was the MVP of the league. Like, I can understand why people said all that. But in all the games, if you include like the round of 8 at Worlds, and now you include some of these games they've lost, whenever he is in a position where like his jungler isn't doing anything for him and he's getting nothing in the mid lane and the other enemy mid laner maybe has advantages, that looks like he has real issues there. I mean, I realize he is still a very young player, but you know, really world championship mids, they can handle that to some degree. They can play out of that, right?
I think one of the problems BDD is facing is that the Longview really likes to draft for a bot lane that cannot be pressured, so it's heavy wave clear and maybe some kind of support that can move around. And I think they have too strong a read on the Ezreal for what they are actually in real matches. I don't think Prey is a good Ezreal for an elite player. I am more impressed by Bang's Ezreal or Deft's. He kind of misses a lot of stuff, and sometimes he will E too long and hit the Scuttle Crab instead of maximizing his damage. So I mean, he's still very good, but not like the best. So then they are sometimes forced into this weird like Orianna-esque comps where you cannot really take advantage of the attack speed from the Ezreal, like you would usually draft Corki Ezreal or Asir Ezreal for this matter to make up for Ezreal's poor scaling, and either you use his ult to nullify pressure on the map or you play for like some kind of very strong mid game. Since they are forced into these weird situations, I cannot really judge BDD because I don't think Ryze or Orianna are some kind of super carries in this meta, and I don't know if this is born from like these weird comps are born from maybe a bot lane problem, maybe BDD doesn't feel safe on other champions because even though he has synergy issues, I agree with Emily here, Peanut actually puts a lot of attention into the mid lane, like he's constantly going there and even sometimes leaving can to dry in order to make BDD feel safe on these prior champions, which they then cannot convert because maybe Can gets pressured out of his good matchup, or maybe if they are playing around the bot lane, they don't really know what to do. So I wouldn't still be like, okay, maybe BDD is a bit whack, but I think the bigger picture is the problem. They are forced into very specific kind of compositions that I think can get really exploited on the 5v5 scenario.
Okay. Right, here's the really bold question then. If you said you have concerns for them, or, you know, they're maybe not like a clear-cut world number one, 2 questions. I want both of you to like, we'll do it by committee. So first question. Okay, which Korean teams could beat them?
I mean, that's the problem with trying to like look at the rest of Korea right now, because Kingzone have very obvious issues, but then you also have like, they just beat Afreeca, and Afreeca have their own, like, I still really like Afreeca a lot, but they have their own issues as a team. You have KT that got absolutely obliterated by Rox this week. And then you have which I'm sure we'll talk about. But like then you have the
KSV loses to everyone.
Yeah, you have the KSV. I'm sure we'll talk about them too. KSV just makes me sad. But you have KSV who's also struggling.
See what I mean?
You have
we're already getting down to
you have this like weird nebulous middle where you're like, okay, I think the thing for me personally is that I can't count on any of these teams to necessarily beat Kingzone, but if you told me that they did, it wouldn't come as like a huge shock, right? It's more that thus far in the split, Kingzone have been able to either bounce back within a game or like come up with the 2-1 like they did against Afreeca. They've always been able to kind of rise above, even in some of their 2-0s that looked a bit shakier. So right now, I still have to say that Kingzone is the best team, but it's mainly because I can't count on the other Korean teams to beat them.
I would agree that right now Kingzone is the best team. I want to see more of Yukal, who I think looked much better than Pong. I think Pong is like a hole in the mid lane, which is pretty sad. Like KT wins games through bot lane and loses games through mid lane, so it's kind of hard to get a good grasp on what they can do. But my hot take is that SKT is actually getting pretty good in map play. it's not that they are getting good in taking dragons for free, because they were already pretty good at reading the enemy pathing and do this, but I think they are starting to really figure out how to use Faker to enable scaling and make up for like the poor coordination of the team, because earlier weeks I thought that they could get into good positions, but then they didn't have the coordination or the team fight into a level where they felt confident to maybe ward deep enough or take the necessary team fight, so they would just end up getting smashed. But I really like how Blossom's playing, and I expect, maybe I'm wrong in this, but my theory is that SKT is putting a lot of practice into team play to try to get the rookies to catch up. And when playoffs come, is when SKT is going to like focus a lot more on mechanical kind of mistakes or training. So even though Faker is playing good and they're usually using him to enable everyone else not being as good, I still don't think that he's even close to the level that he has shown a lot of time. So I am pretty hopeful about this SKT, and it's not because of the shit narrative of SKT always wins. I hate that narrative. They were trash at Worlds, but I think they are looking pretty good in map play right now.
Okay. Right, we'll definitely get to SKT in a minute, but first of all, I have one more question, okay? And this one's a bit more daring. Now, when I ask this question, I mean just what it means on the face value of the question. I'm not asking any of you to compromise your integrity like you're in some sort of a power ranking meeting and tell me like Echo Fox is the 4th best team in the world or something. But here's the question. Are there any teams from any other regions that just in terms of like shadow boxing, you think like, will they have the right team or the right style that they could actually do well against Kingzone? Would you put forward any names? Is there anyone from LPL or NALCS or EULCS? You know, we're talking mainly in terms of style or like where their strengths are situated, you know.
I mean, okay.
I was going to say, I don't want to say this name, but I feel like I kind of have to. And it's IG.
Okay.
I think when you look at Invictus Gaming and the way they're playing right now, and I'm still like, I hate ranking IG. I hate it because they're a lot like KT, right? Where you think like one set, you're like, oh man, this team is phenomenal. And then the next set, they like get super hyphy and dive the Nexus at like 20 minutes and get aced. That didn't actually happen, but they did like do this crazy fountain dive where like all 10 people died and then the minions killed the Nexus. Is pretty hilarious. But I do think that IG playing at their like highest level of what they're capable of is a remarkably strong team. Ning, their jungler, is playing quite well. Even though I think Jackie Love has made a lot of mistakes and people have been maybe unduly harsh on him because of the hype he had coming into the split, right? Because everyone's like, oh yeah, this guy, like he's just gonna come and like transform this IG team, and he's been like fine. He's made a lot of rookie mistakes, but he's still been fairly good. And then that team is still all about Rookie, who is an absolutely phenomenal mid laner. And I think him and Ning are doing a really good job. The Shy is playing super well. And they really seem to be well coordinated as a team, which is not something I would have necessarily been able to say about IGs of past, or at least, you know, since like 2015 when they brought on Rookie and Cacao. Yes. Yeah. So,
okay.
Like, and I hate to say that because I feel like as soon as I say that, like IG are going to get stomped by someone, right? But they are performing very well. So it's a matchup that I really want to see. And I definitely think they have the firepower to be able to deal with Kingzone.
Okay. There's got to be someone in Western who at least has some qualities that would give them a chance, right? I mean, presumably you need a strong bot lane. Right? Why not? Right, what do you... Okay, give me the abstract concepts we need here, Cabra. What would we need first of all for the team to have a chance?
I'm thinking something that I wouldn't like to say, but I could actually see Fnatic doing something, not winning like best of anything, because I think they are a very bad team, like in team-wise, but I think they are like the only team with the amount of individual talent where maybe you can put Soaz in a losing matchup and he will not like fully int, and then he will find ways to be effective. And I think because they are playing so much wave clear and roaming support, Tristana is actually a very good pick into that, because the main weakness of Tristana is getting pushed in, the turret taken, but if she can be ahead on the matchup, it's pretty good. And Reckless is obviously a monster on Trist. Hylissang is pretty good as well when it comes to the 2v2 and engages, so I'm not worried about them getting behind. And Caps is sort of the same. Maybe Broxa could be exploitable, but I don't know. I think that because they match individually and they could pick Tristana into like, I really value in this sort of situations where someone is just wave clearing and roaming, to go for some scaling stuff that can actually also siege, which this is the perfect champion for. And it's very easy to punish, because if they move, you push, and if they don't move, you outscale, because they do not have the setup to punish you. So only because Reckless is so good on Tristana and Sovas is so good in general, I will, and Caps is obviously very good in the 1v1. Like, only Caps can outplay Caps. So yeah, maybe them could do something, but I don't have that much faith.
Okay. Right, well then, since we already opened up the discussion on SKT, let's just keep that going then. Let's talk about SK Telecom. So obviously, as a team, they have gradually continued to pick up wins until basically just the other day. They just lost to Afreeca in a 3-game series. So Emily, give us your side of things. Is SKT continuing to get better week on week? Are they just at the same level they were at last week, which was obviously better? What's your take?
So this is a team that I see improving week to week. It's funny because watching the series last night, it occurred to me that what we see with Blossom on this team right now is what we so desperately wanted to see last year when Peanut was on the team, right? This kind of decisiveness and willingness to go for these aggressive plays once they have vision set up. And that's kind of something we'd hoped to see from them last year when they picked up Peanut, and we didn't. And so it's really cool to see that from bringing on Blossom. I'm not as high on SKT as I think a lot of people are, because I still see a lot of team play mistakes, especially with, as was pointed out, the Faker basically is put into this position where he is still playing a bit for Blossom and for the team, and we still see some weird miscommunications between the two of them that, again, like, it's fixable with experience and time, and that's why you see them like steadily improving as a team from week to week. I think this specific series was a really interesting barometer of where both teams are at, especially since Afreeca started the first 2 games playing a few of their substitutes from their 10-man roster. So I think to their credit, Afreeca played well around the Skarner, and I don't think Blossom, how do I put this? It's a team thing, right? If Blossom wants to play aggressively on the Skarner, especially in game 1, it's a team thing where he has to be communicating with the team, like, okay, I'm going to go, for example, exploit the Zac pathing, which is something that we see super often, where Zac is at blue and he's going for Gromp and blue at the same time. And, Kuro was able to rotate over, and that was actually pretty huge in terms of stymieing the kind of pressure that they wanted out of the early game. And I think that's something that will improve with time, just Faker communicating to Blossom when he has mid priority. There's like a lot of like really small things like that I still see from SKT that I'm like, okay, this team still has like visible cracks, but the difference between them at Worlds or them even last summer is that you can also see where they can improve, and they're very fixable things, which is something that is so refreshing to see from them, that they're not just, it doesn't seem like they're just trying to plug holes anymore, right? It really seems like they're committed to improving this lineup. And Tara looks a lot better. I don't know what they did to like boost his confidence up. But since they've started him as well, he's been playing quite well. So
I mean, he can just play shit champs now, can he? So that helps. Does help, right?
And I think I'm like optimistic about this team. I don't think they're performing at like, I feel like as soon as SKT starts doing well in the community, and I'm not saying this about you, but in the community, people are like, oh yeah, you know, they're like the whole like SKT is just going to win everything kind of thing, which I really dislike as well. I think there's unique, cool things that are going on with this team specifically, like their decisiveness, like the fact that they're willing to communicate and try to set up these skirmishes mid-game to get themselves back into it. We saw that yesterday against the Freecs, where they'd, you know, like try to hide in a bush, or they try to set up a play to get a pick and work off of that. And that's not something that you'd previously see SKT doing. And combining that with the veterans, just the team's overall like map awareness and stuff like river vision control and ward clearing, which I think SKT is actually going to be a really interesting team to watch on the new patch, with the way that vision is going to change with the junglers, because they're very good at clearing vision. And so I think for this team, there's like the only way is up, because the way they've designed this new team around Blossom is just really interesting and really fun to watch, despite the fact that there's still like very obvious mistakes.
Okay. So Cabra, when you said all that stuff before, very bold stuff that like you see them coming through, you also intimated that they might be the team that could come and beat Kingzone if everything goes well and they get to the playoffs. The problem with this series here that they played against Afreeca, the number 2 team, is, I mean, technically they're actually the number 3 team at the time. I think KT was actually above them in the rankings, but irrelevant. They've been number 2 for most of the season.
Yeah, sure.
Is that losing in 3 games to the number 2 team, that's fine, except Afreeca did just basically fuck around, use Mowgli as their jungler, use Amy as their AD carry, and then when it got to game 3, we're like, right, put the real team in. Ah, there we go. That's the win. It's like, you know, it's like holding your little brother at arm's length, you know, and he can't reach you with his punches. That's like what they were doing in game 3. So come on, isn't that like, as much as you're hyping them up, isn't that a bit underwhelming that they couldn't beat this team of subs?
I mean, I'm not going to say it's not underwhelming, but I disagree with Emily on some stuff. For example, I think Untara is doing better, mainly because I think one of Untara's biggest weakness is not that he's mechanically bad, but the fact that he has very low awareness over the enemy pathing. Like, he cannot be decent in lane and also be aware of the jungler. So I think he has good synergy with Blossom, who I think is a very good jungler at tracking. And also I thought the same thing Emily did when Blossom did this level 3 invade as Skarner to sort of, it looked like he was trying to punish the sack. But in retrospective, I think what he was trying to do is spot the blue buff timer, because what they will do 4 minutes later or 5 minutes later, when their blue is up, they give the blue to Faker. Again, it's a mage matchup, Corki versus Galio, so Galio doesn't have the blue buff. Faker gains the prio. And now when their blue spawns and they are going to get the blue, SKT sneaks a Drake, which was also an Infernal Drake. Since they were playing a scaling composition, this Drake is very dangerous for them. So the fact that they could use the information of the spotted blue buff to abuse this window really impressed me. And also the fact that later when they used the Herald, I'm not sure if mid lane was the right lane to do it. Maybe both would have been better, and the timing was definitely bad. But they were like 2 or 3 seconds away from actually taking the Infernal from themselves. It's just that the Herald got cleared way too early. But if this composition gets 2 Infernals, then it's absolutely done, because both SKT and KSV have recognized that Afreeca do not know the sentence, "I will not take this fight." So they both drafted very, very heavy teamfight compositions that were looking to scale and then fight around the top side jungle when they were playing red side, because you need to control this jungle in order to take the Baron. But since Afreeca always take every fight, you can draft in this way, and if you manage not to fall behind, you can actually beat them, I think. So I thought the first game was actually really, really close, but because there was this weird timing of the Herald, which is a pretty advanced play, so I don't blame anyone, and then Faker greeted for a cannon bounce on the top lane when he should have reset to move and clear the mid lane wave. This completely put them out of the game, but I actually think this game was almost won by SKT, so in that way I disagree with Blossom's invade being bad. And I'm actually pretty hyped about this jungler because he not only is good at tracking and aggressive, but he's also smart in the way that he does it, where he will know what maybe in this game, it was the second game, he did it to Spirit, but he also did it in another game from the blue side playing Jarvan. Well, he will hide in a bush, and Jarvan is actually super strong when someone face checks into you because you get the armor reduction for free, then you do the passive and you fuck them up. And he actually catched Spirit, and he was able to get an advantage from this. And the same in another game where he was able to get a free Baron because he chunked an enemy Camille that was being greedy with a reset. So I'm actually very, very impressed with Blossom for a rookie. And it gives me really high hopes of SKT, especially because I think having a winning mid lane and a jungler that's good at tracking is going to be imperative in a metagame where you cannot have the tracker's knife. So yeah, I disagree with Emily in this regard, and I'm pretty hyped about SKT, but I think I have good reasons for it. It's not like, oh, they're playing Faker and he's a god and Bang is the best ADC. If only he can get to form. Like, it's not like that.
Okay, well, what about this then? Now that SKT's actually got some wins and they've played enough of the season where we have an idea of what the lineup is, they're not just changing players all the time. Where do you actually put Faker for this split? Because I always felt like when they were losing at the beginning, it was a bit unfair to rank him because everything else in the team was so bad. It's like he was the last of their problems, you know. Where would you say overall for the split? Where's Faker at the moment?
First?
Yeah, go for it.
What, just of everyone? No, he means first as in the best.
So. Like, I mean... The thing with Faker is that, as Emily said, he's always on like plug-in duty, playing Jesus Christ, trying to heal the lepers. And this is very taxing for him. For example, in the third game against Afreeca, he has to play this echo matchup into Talia, which can work, but it's not ideal with two losing lanes because you will constantly get pressured from the side lanes. And then it's even like, if they are evenly matched in skill, Talia should at least be even and have the prior. So even in this situation, he's playing the Echo and he's absorbing so much pressure. He's making some misplays, but still he's able to extend the laning phase up to 20 minutes because the Talia can never move out of the mid lane to secure vision, which is actually huge for nullifying the Freaks, since I think they have very, very good mid jungle synergy. But I would say that Faker, if anything, is looking worse than he is because he's playing sort of the bitch for the team, kind of trying to be savior, but from a servant position in a lot of situations. So that even at that point, he's able to perform this well, I think is very impressive. And I don't think this is like close to prime Faker or anything. I think he will be better when they don't focus as much on team playing, maybe they do on mechanics.
Okay, where would you rank him, Emily? By the way, what's actually good is a quick point there as well, actually, is when you gave the analogy of he's like Jesus healing the lepers, there's actually a part in the Bible where there's a famous story of a woman who's got some sort of like illness and it's like a blood complication. And she does go and she finds Jesus in the street, right? And she sort of like sneaks a little touch on him because she knows that he's got like the healing touch, you know? And famously it says in the Bible, it says he felt the power go out of him because the idea that like anytime he heals, it sort of like uses up sort of his like, you can imagine like a stamina bar of ability, you know? And so in this scenario, I agree. That's a pretty good analogy for Faker because not only does he have to play his fucking role, which is a hard role anyway, he also just get all these motherfuckers. He's just like, well, I need it, Faker. He's like, right, can only give the healing touch to so many people in this one game. Come on. Okay, Emily. So anyway, where does our Lord and Savior Faker rank?
I mean, I'm going to agree primarily because I think the reservations that I now have about BDB, despite the fact that, so like I'm looking at other mids, right? Like who are you going to put up there? Like Pawn is out, obviously. BDD, BDD, we have the same the similar issues. Kuro, I thought, played quite well against Faker in these matchups, actually, which is very interesting historically if you know how poorly Kuro performed against Faker when he was on the Tigers. And even, I believe, back when he was on Incredible Miracle as well.
Yeah. Are you ready to get really sad because there are no more mid laners in the LCK? I know you're going to say some names,
exactly.
but there are no more at this point.
Down.
Every other team has a weak mid laner, right?
Yeah. You Cal's our only hope. No, I think so. I think the only other one who's in contention is Kuro, and I do think that's a very interesting discussion. But I guess I see a few more flaws in Blossom as a jungler in terms of how he communicates information to the team and how much Faker is doing for him by getting mid priority and playing very specific champions for SKT in order to further bring Blossom on to the team. So I think that's still what's really, I guess, outstanding from Faker specifically, is that he is doing just a lot of work for the team itself, and a lot of stuff that isn't as readily apparent or as flashy as something that you kind of want. Like when you think of like the best mid laner, you want to see like the crazy outplay, like in bot lane where he was split pushing and they tried to dive on him. And he gets like the 3-man echo stun, and you're just like, yeah, this is like kind of what I want to see from.
Save exhaust.
Yeah, well, put it this way, Emily, they haven't done what I hoped they would do, which is like when he was playing like the odd Kassadin game and just carrying. I hoped that they would just go, right, this team's.
There were pieces of it, right?
We're gonna make you like we're gonna do like what Jin Air does for Teddy. We're just gonna set you up. You're like the super soldier. Everyone else just is there to help you carry, and if we lose, at least you were good. But they obviously haven't done that. Yeah, he is very much.
I think in the long run, it'll be the best for the team because, again, I think Blossom has a very high ceiling. I think the team itself is going in the right. They're definitely on the right trajectory. But I think that's why, like, if you look at people talking about Faker the Split, they're like he isn't as impressive. Even when Blossom has been on the team, and there have been. Like I said, those very obvious moments of miscommunication that I think happen between Faker and Blossom in terms of the timing of what they want to do. Because I actually think they're very well matched, right? Because Blossom does always want to track his opponent and be an aggressive force for the team and apply pressure. And Faker, you know, his default is that he wants to play forward. He wants to play aggressively. He wants to not only get mid priority, but take over the map through the mid lane. And so in that regard, again, I think the two of them are very well matched. And as Blossom continues to improve and as his communication continues to improve, then you will also, not so coincidentally, probably see Faker start to quote unquote look better. In terms of the way I've seen people discussing him in the split.
Okay.
I still think it hasn't happened in the recent games, so I still think Faker, if there's one thing I could like point out that he could work on, it's definitely his teleports are still kind of suspect sometimes. And I don't know if that's it is probably a team communication thing, but he had some really wonky ones last split and at Worlds, and then this split, especially the beginning of this split, there were still some pretty wonky teleports from him.
Right, well, let's transition this then to the team that just played, Afreeca Freecs. So the first question I have to ask is this. Does that actually, like, Afreeca is a team where they hadn't really had any problems this season. Things have gone really well. They've done very, very well in all their matches. Their lineup looks very solid top to bottom. So does the fact that for the first two games against SK Telecom, they play these two subs, and in terms of someone like Gaming, just completely out of nowhere, is that some sort of, like, disrespect to SK Telecom? Why would you speculate they would make these moves? Surely they'd just play the full 5.
Because I know they played aiming against KSV as well, right? And that was a like full on stomp. Even though I value Spirit highly, and I think that him and Kuro work really well together, I do think that Spirit sometimes falls, and this is again like pure speculation as to why they'd start Mowgli, because I don't even think Mowgli did these things, but sometimes Spirit falls into that trap where he just farms, and he's obviously farming so that they can fight, right? Because Afreeca loves these like mid-game fights. And sometimes that is at a cost of jungle pressure. Like if you look at, I forget what specific Camille game it was, but like you saw, for example, I believe it was Raze do the level 2 gank on Camille. And I was like, finally, someone did this, because Spirit has been the only, like, I guess, competent to good jungle Camille that we'd seen in Korea up until that point. And he still didn't take advantage of some of that early pressure that Camille can apply. He just kind of power farmed until he was this absolute monster that no one could really deal with in skirmishes and fights. So from my perspective, maybe it's so that they were thinking Mowgli would apply more early pressure, or they just wanted to give him time. I'm not really sure, but like if I had to point out one like flaw in the way that Spirit plays the game, is that sometimes he does tend to just really focus on power farming, and that can be at the cost of early pressure. But I don't feel like we necessarily saw a ton of that from Mowgli either. It, especially in like game 1, it became a lot more about Twch initiating fights for the 5v5. So it was like Twch would go in, and then Kuro slamming in with the Gallia ult, and then the whole team is kind of collapsing. So I don't really know. I just wanted to point out that one thing that sometimes bugs me a bit from Spirit, because I do think that he could afford to apply a bit more early pressure, especially given the way that Afreeca likes to play. So yeah.
Okay, but on the other end of the equation, why would you take Kramer out? Wasn't he like one of the best ADCs?
Was he though?
You tell me, man.
Well, I'm not that high on Kramer, actually. Maybe, I don't know. I don't think he's all that good. I think he really gets a lot for how much frontline they usually play and how good everyone in the team is at skirmishing. They usually want to draft these team fighting supports, even at the cost of having a decent lane, which maybe, you can maybe not blame Kramer if he's getting like maybe a worse support matchup. But I think it's pretty easy to play ADC when your team is sick at skirmishing and they only draft for it. So I'm not that high on Kramer.
Okay. So, well then, would you stick with aiming then?
No. I think aiming is worse, but I understand the logic behind it.
Right, I see. What about general thoughts on Afreeca then?
I really like their mid-jungle synergy. I think that they are very top-side oriented, which can be good, but also is costing them in some games in terms of maybe weird setups from drafts or not getting as much as they could from Spirit, who will overdive the top lane in certain situations. But overall, I think they are pretty good. But of course, they're fucking good. Like, trying to be the best team in the world. I mean, it's the name of the show. I think they are pretty good, but I don't think these changes are a good direction to try to develop. I would actually want to see them trying different stuff, maybe some kind of complementary style that they can follow into if they cannot draft a team fighting support, and if they cannot play for the top side, maybe they are playing like King is pretty fucking good at Sion, but it's not a champion that hard snowballs. So I would like more so to see them try other stuff, maybe try to play through the bot lane than only sticking to this style and just swapping players. Because if you're putting it in aiming because Kramer is not that good, aiming is worse. He stays too far back. It feels to me like when the skirmish start, he's kind of being micromanaged, just like ult. And
I mean, you could see it even in the. Just like, sorry to interrupt, I was just going to say, like, you can compare his Kalista to Kramer's Kalista directly, and the difference is absolutely massive.
Yeah.
And I also am not, like, super, super high on Kramer either. I know the team themselves is, but because they've said so. But, but, like, even just comparing, like, there is a direct... Yeah, there's a direct side-by-side comparison with their Kalistas that you can see. Like, there's a difference.
Okay. Right, here's a question for you. Remember, if you are the best in Korea, oftentimes automatically the best in the world. So is Twch the best support player in the world?
No.
Got to be asked, right? It's a question you got to consider.
Gotta be. I don't think he is. Again, I think he's sick at team fighting. I think he's a fucking god in team fights. I'm not that sold on everything else. Like, I don't think his laning is that great.
Just last night, we saw him miss like a bunch of stuff on Recon.
And also, I cannot fully blame this on him, but because since Afreeca is not branching into another style, maybe he's not getting time to practice. These maybe like some of these scenarios of this is working, so we are only playing this. So maybe he's not getting practice and scrims or whatever, but I didn't love his resets. I think his roams are pretty good. I think his team fighting is excellent, but I don't think this is enough to qualify him as the best supporter in the world. I just think Afreeca are one of those teams that they have a very, very clear identity, and every player's weakness sort of builds into it, and they hide each other a bit.
Who is the best support player in the world then?
I don't know.
That is not a valid answer.
Mata?
Mata? Okay.
I think
who would you put forward, Emily?
I was gonna say Mata. I think the thing with Tucson is that his laning needs a lot of work. Like, I still think so. I think that Tucson is having a career year, and I haven't seen him play this well. And I also haven't seen him play this well, like, with a team, because I think they play around him very well, right? With him setting up engages. I think Mata is playing fairly well. If you look over at China, I think Mako is always someone that you have to keep in the conversation. Although I do still have to catch up on EDG's latest series. So
does anyone know what the fuck Sword Art is up to? Because I don't watch any LMS. But...
Right, okay.
Sword Art?
Their team got fucked, didn't it? Yeah.
No, they're in the top of the LMS still.
That's how bad the LMS is, that they could lose the fucking best jungle and still be at the top of the LMS. What a fucking joke that is. Then again, AHQ's been a retirement club for about 2 years, so I guess it does make sense all in all. Right, okay. Let's transition then to this question. So the team I actually want to talk about now is KSV, since they just played against Afreeca. And this is why, okay? Because KSV in the rankings is ranked 4th in Korea. But here's all you need to know. They have won less games, individual games, than 6 teams this season. And remember, one of their wins was the one where they got basically as close to a freebie as you can get against the best team, Kingzone. So this is a team that has been in free fall for a couple of weeks now. They've got a lot of issues. Cabra, is KSV even going to make the playoffs? Remember, 6 teams make playoffs, and the only teams below them is Rox, SK Telecom. These are the world champions.
Okay, so who's making playoffs, right? Because
5 teams make playoffs. So
yeah,
5 teams.
There's
right.
like the wild card match, which, as far as I know, if they haven't changed anything, is like the best of 3, and then it goes up the gauntlet.
Yes. So as far as I know, 4 plays 5 in the wild card, and then the other 2 games to get to the final.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you either have to stay at this level or win more games. Like, they're in trouble, mate.
No, yeah, they are really in trouble. I think QB is playing pretty well, but maybe not as good as he was playing at Worlds. I think Ruler is playing pretty fucking well. I think Crown is not. Neither is Core JJ. And the main thing with Ambition is that he feels really, really disconnected from the team. So I don't know how much they're screaming with him. Maybe now they will stick to him in order to make playoffs and just constantly play with him. But when they were playing Afreeca, like, Ambition was just going in the most random times, in super weird place. And even though the composition to me made sense, which already is an improvement from usual KSV, that will play anything but smart stuff around the Zoe, still it didn't manage to work. Mainly, I think because Ambition was just going in at. He went in two situations where it didn't make any sense, and the game was just done because it was the same plan as SKT had of team fighting on the top side. But if you get really, really behind, you cannot team fight anyone.
I think the issue for KSV making playoffs is that they need a turnaround very quickly because of the way the rest of Korea is shaping up, where you still have even like MVP and like even Kongdu, like you have to take those two teams seriously, in my opinion. And then you have BBQ and Jin Air, who are two teams that annoy me, but they also can, especially BBQ, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But like they're two teams that they can take not just games, but series, right? You have Rox, who I've reiterated over and over on the show. They're a very good team at playing as a unit, which is incredibly valuable. Do they have like the best mechanical players? No, but as we again saw...
I mean, we would have said in the past, Emily, that logically Rox probably... Like, basically, KSV should have been the cut-off for Rox. That should be like, right, you probably shouldn't beat teams them and above, and you probably should be the one... I think at this point in time, why the hell can't Rox Tigers beat KSV? I think it'd be reasonable.
Oh, I think they absolutely can. Because Rox, again, like, aside from that one hiccup last week, where I thought their draft was kind of suspect, especially when they played Mighty Bear and Kingzone, and it like was just really awkward and didn't make a whole ton of sense, and then they didn't execute around it, so you know Kingzone's karma was effectively useless. I think that Rox is a very dangerous team because of that, because they can go into a series and they can play really well again, like around they can play really well around Unsealed Spellbook and teleports, and they don't have, but they also don't have to play that way, right? They just are very good at communicating as a team when they're playing the Xianghuan lava mid jungle, and that's very dangerous for a team like KSV in the standings, because you can't say that Rox is going to fall necessarily. And like obviously we've talked about SKT, and like I agree that they're on the rise, like despite the fact that the beginning of the splits like was absolutely awful, they're definitely a team that is making a run at playoffs. And then you look at BBQ and Jin Air, and again they can take series, so KSV is in serious trouble. And the thing that's the most concerning to me is that not only the disconnect between their junglers and their lanes, but also the fact that they just don't do anything. Like
even when they beat Kongdu, every game was like 35 minutes, 36, like
they just see so much pressure on the map for nothing. And it's very frustrating. Like, it's actually actively frustrating to watch because you're just watching a team basically give up like turrets and objectives for free. And you're like, okay, what are they doing? Well, it seems, I guess, that they're playing for the late game team fight, kind of like what they used to do. But it's still, because they're not getting anything, they're making it that much more difficult for themselves. And it's not leading to wins. It's leading to them getting, destroyed by Afreeca earlier this week. So I'm concerned about KSV. Because basically it's just, they don't seem to have any sort of like fire or game plan outside of like seeding objectives until maybe they can 5v5, and then they I don't know. That Afreeca series was just really, really rough to watch.
Yeah.
You know how you get... Okay, yeah?
Oh, no. Like, they got, 4 Drakes to Afreeca. They just... Ugh, it was bad. I'm just reading over my notes to see if there's anything else.
It's a bit unfair because I feel like they also got a bit fucked by the meta. In Worlds, they became really successful with this style of playing through the bot lane and being very effective at sieging with the Ardent Sensor. And then suddenly the metagame is Targons, is Minion Dematerializer, all this. And these AD carries like Ezreal that can clear, they will not siege, but you cannot really force into them. So this is kind of whack for what they were really, really good at, Worlds. But even then, like, if this team looked super crisp in teamfights in the past, and now they are drafting for teamfights, and they are drafting composition that out teamfight, a team that we don't even consider the best in Korea, and still they suck massive cock, like at every point in the game. That's looking terrible. I would like to say the same. I said about SKT that it looks like they are working on game stuff, but it really doesn't. Like, Haru is, I think, not very good at resetting and vision control. So I think that if he's not good at this point, he will never be. And Ambition, I quite like his pathing, even if it's passive. He sort of relies on creating windows that he knows he for sure can exploit to track the enemy jungler. But he seems really disconnected with the team, and the team as a whole seems super disconnected with each other. And they are drafting, not now, like the Afreeca game was pretty good, but there was a time when they were trying to play it more, that they draft completely nonsensical stuff. Like, I don't even understand what can be going on inside of this team, but it's a huge breakdown.
Because you know how you'll sometimes get a storyline. I mean, there's plenty of them in history where, like, you know, a player was the best or who's amazing. So I would think of, like, Smeb last year. 2 years ago, rather, 2016. Like, yeah, probably should have won Worlds. That would have been, like, a fitting kind of cap to that year, and what an amazing career he'd had, etc. Never happened, though. I think sometimes one thing that's not discussed enough is the storylines that are unfair the other way around. So you remember that feature piece they did on Crown going into season 7 Worlds, where it was like, oh, look, you know, he lost last year, but he's been training so hard. You know, every day he's thinking about Faker, he's thinking about SK Telecom, he's training. And then the story goes, oh, you know what? He finally did it. He overcame everything. He won Worlds. It's like, I almost want to walk out when they're like handing the trophy
still
on stage.
Really bad.
And be like, by the way, you know all that storyline of you working out, you didn't do any of that. Like, you didn't deserve this trophy. Give me the trophy back. Like, everyone else in the team should get a trophy. You should get nothing. You get absolutely nothing. Like, you did none of that. Like, that's so criminal. Isn't he one of the worst mid laners in fucking LCK now?
Not one of the worst, but...
What do you mean, not one of the worst? Okay. So there's 10 mid laners in the LCK, Gabriel. Where is he in that mix? 10.
Okay. I would say Faker's first, second is BDD, third is Kuro, and now... Am I forgetting about someone? Okay, those are like the clear best. And I don't know now between Lava and Tempt. I don't really have an opinion because Tempt is a bit coin flippy, but he also willed himself into a victory against Kingzone, which I give a lot of weight to.
Okay, so how many?
And I would say Crown is about in that tier, but I would also say like the LCK mid lane pool is trash. Like, it's not at all strong for what you would expect of the region. So I would say he hangs around 6th place. I don't think he's worse than Grace or Ian. Like, must be nice being Grace, playing Talia all day, and having Teddy fucking beast the game and Wraith find these crazy engages. I don't think he's worse than those two, at least.
Okay. Where would you put him, Emily?
I mean, Ian is rough. Grace, I think he could, like, I think I probably give a bit of leeway. I still don't think he's good. Like, I would still put Crown above Grace due to, like, just general map awareness and stuff like that. I also think Jin Air have done a little bit better of a job maybe drafting around Grace's weaknesses as of late. Tempt has been performing better. Yeah, I would say Crown is... Like, I consider him better than Tempt, but I think in terms of, like, who's performing better right now, it's pretty rough, just because KSV seems so completely disconnected from each other.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Is pretty terrible as well. So there's kind of a big competition.
Still has games he goes off. Still has games he goes off.
He also has games where he goes off the cliff. Like,
mate, Crown has nothing.
Games
what are you talking about? What does Crown ever do?
And I mean, yeah, that's right. But Pong gets to play with Score, who I think is the best juggler in the world. He has Smeb, who I think is a fucking beast, and he has monster laners.
I'm not defending Pong. I'm just saying in the context of this, though. Come on.
What I'm saying is that Pong gets to play in a lot of scenarios where it's just like, okay, Pong, push and just don't fuck up. And whenever the eggs are on Pong's basket, like maybe I'm biased because of the...
No, he has lost a lot of games, for sure, yeah.
These two games where he looked terrible, was it against the Rox Tigers that they...
Yeah, the two Azir games, like the most recent ones, those were pretty rough,
The second Azir game is so terrible. Like, it's mind-blowingly bad. Like, he has absolutely... For what Pong should be, he has absolutely no awareness of the enemy thresh. He doesn't know when he has to group with his team in a team fight and when he has to move away, like when they get Talia ulted near the pit, and then Pong, instead of like ulting and hugging the wall like Deft did, because they could flash out and they also have dashes, he just grouped with the team. So he gave King a super value ultimate. He offered no threat for the team and they just got wrecked. And the same happened on the bot lane team fight when he gets caught by Lava's Q, even though he shouldn't, because he has vision and he can play back and down instead of forward and up, like just asking to be bursted. So I think Pong is playing. I think he's very boosted, very boosted.
I'm gonna return to something I said in the first week of the show when we were just looking at like basic rosters and talking about how the teams had played at Worlds and in the LCK summer. And it's that Pong, he has like his shining moments occasionally, but he rarely has mid pressure. And the problem is that sometimes when he gets out of lane, he is just bad. He has no map awareness. He's not drawing enough pressure to be useful in a side lane. And so he's a liability to the team. Now, Crown, despite the fact that I would also agree, he also struggles to have mid pressure. I do give Crown credit, especially on champions that can affect the side lanes a bit more. I do think Crown has better map awareness. And I think that is very valuable. Unfortunately, the problem with evaluating that within KSV now is that the entire team just seems like they're not communicating with each other. So they're not getting any sort of value out of Crown being able to split a side wave or Crown being able to maybe draw some pressure off of a certain area of the map so that KSV can then move in and do something. And I like kind of stand by what I said that first week where I was looking at these two and I was like, these two are both underperforming in terms of what we've seen both of them be capable of, but at least Crown does have a better sense of the map.
Okay. Let me ask this question back to you, Thorin. Who in KT is worse than the KSV equivalent for Crown?
Mate, I've never thought KSV had a good team. I thought their team the thing is, though, they're a good example of a team. This is a factor that definitely applies to League of Legends more than any other team game I'm aware of. Like in League of Legends, if as a cohesive unit you can be better as a team than literally a team that has everyone better than you individually. I've never seen that in any other team game. Normally, individual skill will just nudge it out in that sense, you know.
And it's also like it's the worst combination because you can be good, bad, and you can be proactive or defensive. And like if you are good and defensive, it's like this whole potential storyline. But if you are bad and aggressive, like I feel Pon is in a lot of ways, it's like just let yourself be carried, please.
Sure.
Stop
exactly.
trying.
Yeah. But then again, though, by the same rationale, that's part of the problem KSV has. They're bad and defensive, so they just scale to a loss. They just go right. It's almost like they're just like don't lose before 35 minutes.
It's
After
just
that's
super
fine.
frustrating to watch them cede all this map pressure for nothing. That's my thing with KSV.
Okay,
but
so then let's
to your point, like they were a team that, like when they came into Worlds, they got into groups. They actually didn't look solid. They went on interview, and you can see the adjustments they made to attacking the bot side. But they said, like, yes, scrimming and playing against RNG really helped us because we learned how to play through bot side. And they were a team that was greater than the sum of their parts, right? And so now that they're not communicating as well, they look that much worse.
Okay. Right, then let's transition into the KT topic then, because obviously the thing about KT is, okay, they had some wins the week before. They come into this week. They should, in theory, when you look on paper, they've got Rox, they've got Kongdi Monsters, right? This should be like keep picking up wins, especially after Afreeca's get back into number 1 position, get back to number 2, be right behind Kingzone, and they've obviously lost to Rox Tigers. So now on paper, if you want to use that logic you used before, it should be impossible for Rox Tigers to beat KT Rolster. That doesn't even make sense. Yeah. So what's going on with KT Rolster, Cabra? Come on.
I mean, I think I've bashed Pong enough, but
can't just be Fawn, right? There's got to be other problems.
In the end, Loco Doco was right. You can just tilt them, apparently. I don't know.
Glad it went there. I was wondering where that was going. Where the fuck has he been right recently? Right, okay, years ago. Yes, of course. Yes,
reference
years ago.
game.
He was. Yes, not bad. Yeah.
I think like KT are pretty good. No, actually, I think they are very good at playing a good early game. In the sense that if they get ahead, I think they've even improved quite a lot from the past year, where maybe they didn't know how to really siege, even if they had bot lane pressure. Like in the first game against, when it was still Samsung Galaxy, they had this whole draft that completely could pressure the bot lane, but they only understood it through dives and like all-in kinds of plays, and they would often throw advantages in this manner. But I feel like they've become more refined. But I also think that they are one of these teams with the if you play it out correctly mindset, where often not only will they go for very, very cocky plays, especially deft and meta, that that it maybe do not make sense, but also I feel like that they get a bit on their own head, and they sort of, if they fall behind, they get really desperate because they imagine all the stuff they would do to close the game, and then it's like, okay, we're fucked, we have to fight here right now. And I think you saw a bit of this in the second Rox game, I think, where the bot lane was very desperate to make plays happen. But overall, I also feel like it's very easy to overvalue KT because of their raw talent, but there's also a very big disconnection through the mid lane that makes it super hard to play through both side lanes. I think Smeb is really, really, really good, but he gets very little attention because when KT is ahead, they're usually doing so through the bot lane, which I think is very reasonable with how good they are in lane. But since they also can get behind on the mid lane, scores, agenda, how do you say it? Like the thing where he keeps where he has to go, and like I have to help this guy or snowball this side, it's completely full. Like he has almost no time for Smeb, so it's pretty hard to make the team work in that sense. I'm very, very hyped about the new mid laner. What's his name? Yukel? Yeah, but he only played 2 games, so I think he's mechanically very good, but we have to see much more of him. Like 2 games is nothing to evaluate a player. But I think people often underestimate how big of a hole the mid lane is because of this whole overvaluing what you can do and going in anyway and trying to carry when you should just stay on your position and do nothing. I think this team gets usually very, very, very overestimated, but I also think they've improved, so maybe they can get it together with another mid laner.
Emily, they're probably not going to change Pawn out permanently, right? Do you think they're just testing it out, or do you think they actually might go with this?
I mean, so I think in the KT Rock series, there's a really good example of just like we talk about jungle mid constantly on the show. I harp on it probably too much. And to his point, in the KT Rock series, there's game 1 where they do that red side invade, where Smeb comes down, Score is trying to invade red, and they do not have mid pressure. It's actually like glaringly obvious, and it's a huge problem, and it's one of the reasons why that play does not work out. And so you can fault Score and Smeb for going for that play regardless, or you can chalk it up to some kind of weird miscommunication issue with them not looking to see where the mid lane wave was, or Pawn not communicating where his wave was. And I think that in and of itself is a microcosm for how much KT needs some sort of mid lane presence, because Score is the type of jungler who's always, I think Kelsey put it best, where she said he's always going to do the correct thing. Like, he's going to do what the most he's usually going to do what the most advantageous play is for that specific moment, which means that typically if he doesn't have mid priority, he's probably not going to be making that play. But also it means that a lot of his attention and time, instead of, for example, snowballing top lane or trying to play through Smeb, who does get less attention, they're either trying to play through bot lane, or he's trying to cover up a bit for the fact that they lack mid priority more often than not, because Pawn is falling behind in lane, usually regardless of matchup. I mean, I think it's an issue if you're looking at KT as a team. So do they replace Pawn depends on whether they think they can get better mid priority through UCal. Because if UCal has more pressure mid, you're then going to see Score doing a lot more things. Just because he's going to take that into consideration. So, I mean, it's 2 games. It's Azir, and it's against Kongdu Monster. So you have to take all of those factors into consideration as well. But the fact that they did want to give UCal a chance against this team and try him out with the rest of the team, and the fact that he did keep up mid pressure, and he, like, maybe it's a bit unfair, but like comparing his 2 Azir games to Pawn's Azir games back to back, it's like, again, like we talked about the Kalista with aiming and Kramer, like it's like night and day in terms of what these players are able, or what UCal is able to do. Yeah. So I think it's difficult for me to say that they're going to definitely move forward with UCal, but I do not disagree with the idea to start him in the series. And I do think that going forward, at the very least, we probably will, or KT probably will be scrimming with him a lot more if they haven't been already, which I would assume they have been already anyway. Yeah. So I think it's something that the team is obviously looking at, right? Because you can't have this like black hole in the mid lane and expect to, that's just such a huge drain on everyone, because your jungler can't do a lot of things, especially a jungler like Score, who, you know, historically he has struggled if his lanes do not have pressure, because even though he will choose like quote unquote the correct thing to do, it's a lot harder for him, or he has less decisions. He has fewer decisions, right? If his lanes are constantly just ceding pressure. And so that's really what is under consideration when you're looking at KT going forward. It kind of depends on where they end up. They're done for this week, and they have SKT, KSV, Kingzone, BBQ, MVP, and Afreeca is their final series. So a relatively, like, there are a lot of games against. They have the KSV game. They have the Afreeca game to close out the season, which is probably going to be very important for standings. And then they have KSV and SKT next week, which is also going to be pretty important in terms of looking at playoff standings. So I'm wondering if, depending on the KSV BBQ series, if they decide to start UCal against KSV specifically, since, again, we've talked about Crown and how many issues he's had in the mid lane. If they can try to test out him in that series as well. I'm not sure if they'll do it against SKT. We'll see how that goes. That'll be really interesting to see what they do with the mid lane against SKT.
Actually, I think not only that they've been practicing a lot with UCal, because I thought their lane assignments were pretty good even in subtle situations, but also that you can see a clear evolution where in the Rox series, they are playing Shen in the second game and they are playing Brom with Spellbook in the first game. So what I thought that happened when Score made that invade, I think that invade in a vacuum is a bad invade because usually you should not, even being evenly matched, you should not get pressure as a series into Zoe at that point in the game. But what I thought is that Score was used to Mata running teleport after first reset, and they didn't communicate it. So they actually got into a very weird situation. But it makes a lot of sense to me that the Shen was awkward also in the second comp, so I think they were trying to cover for that weakness, and when they saw that didn't work, it was okay, let's just put the new guy in and see what he's able to do. And also I wanted to clarify that in this game, with this where this invade was going, to everyone that's all over Kang, whenever he's winning, Smeb was playing a losing matchup with Ocean Dragon. He was roaming more and he was ahead in CS. So someone please explain how that can happen if someone is not an absolute god at League of Legends, because I didn't realize people
were crapping on Smeb for that, but all right.
Ever since he joined KT, people have always been like, "Oh, he's not that good, is he?" Because, like, unfortunately, their logic is like they still think it's like 5 years ago, and I have a star top laner, everything to the top laner now. It's like that hasn't happened for a long time. Come on, man. I mean, even the fact that Khan's doing this shit is partly because, like, every other position on his team is really good, and the team wins every game anyway. Like, he almost has free license to do that shit.
And then play the weirdest stuff to nullify bot lane pressure. Like they were playing Tarek Sivir in their first game with double minion dematerializer just to play for the top lane. So to me, it's like kind of this guy in a battlefield is like mounted on a horse, beating everyone, and everyone is saying, "Holy fuck, this guy really knows how to use a sword."
To take your analogy, here's the thing: Smeb is basically doing in the top lane what Faker does in the mid lane. Still be one of the best, even with all the disadvantages.
Really, you know? I think that's a good comparison.
Because actually, I mean, I saw it was like this week that they said that Smeb had reached 1,000 kills in LCK, which admittedly, unfortunately, those records don't mean as much because obviously the early OGN tournaments were just like tournaments and you played like, sometimes like 13 games or less, So obviously none of the old school people are up on these lists. It's basically just Faker and then all the new school people who played in LCK. But with that said, it was making me think actually, because tying into this, despite what people might think, for most of the time in KT, Smeb was one of the best features of that team still. I think you actually have to look at it, and when you consider how many years now he's played, because obviously the LCK era is when he became like a big name, that's still like quite a lot of seasons. This guy has to be like top 5 player of all time, any position at this point. Like you just look at his body of work, it's unreal.
Yeah.
At Worlds every single year, in tons of LCK playoffs, has now even won LCK. Like, what a fucking amazing player.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's a bit like how, like, so to wit how we talked about Faker, but also a bit like how I think people were talking about Prey and Gorilla, especially last summer, where everyone was talking about Khan, and Prey and Gorilla were on these champions where they were initiating really well and they were just playing really, really well in the bot lane. But since they weren't getting like the flashy kills in team fights, or they weren't like absolutely obliterating their lane, no one was really talking about them, and everyone was talking about Khan on that team. I think that tends to happen a bit with KT as well, especially since, to their credit, I do think Deft and Mata have been performing better this year than they did previously. So they're obviously going to be getting a lot of attention, especially since KT is still playing through them.
Okay. Because despite all those things you both said about KT, they're still second place in the fucking league. They won 75% of their games. They've only lost to Kingzone, Afreeca, and now this shock to Rox. So
everyone that's not Pong is very fucking good in that team.
Do you think they can actually win LCK?
With Yukal, maybe. With Pong, I don't think so. But I think they are, purely talking lane, I think they have the best lane in bot lane in the whole LCK. Like maybe the only thing that I don't like in Mata compared to Gorilla is that Mata will never give up a chance to make a sick play and carry, even though he could make a more smarter version of that, a smarter version, not more smarter, of that play that will net a kill in a higher percentage of times. It's what I meant when I said they are kind of this, if you play it out correctly, guys, where they will go for sick mechanical plays that maybe are not needed to snowball the matchup.
Okay. Right. Since they did lose to this team, let's talk about the Rox Tigers. Cabra, is the Rox Tigers actually a good team?
Are they though? I don't know. I don't think Lava is very good. I think he's very good in team fights, but his laning is kind of whack, which is hidden if he's laning against Spawn, but it's not if he's laning against a decent mid laner. I think their jungler is very good. He really knows how to get pressure in, maybe if they are losing in any other lane, but weren't they playing like in 2 winning matchups in the top that looked like losing matchups? Or I don't know. I think they are very good at team fighting, but I also think that that's kind of their only strength in a way. I don't think they have the talent nor the smart play to make up for their shortcomings in talent. But yeah, that's kind of my short take on it.
Okay. What do you think, Emily?
I mean, a lot of this is going to be repeating what I've said previously about the Tigers, but I respect them a lot.
How about this then? Let's spin it a different way. So this season they have beaten KT Rolster, and they also had the upset win over KSV earlier. So those are teams that are ranked above them. If this team goes to the playoffs, do you think they can actually beat any of these teams in best of 5?
I think it'll be a lot more difficult for them to. Although, so like the thing that I give the Tigers credit for is understanding their own weaknesses. There's only been one series where I've really been like, what on earth is this team doing around what they have? And that was the one where they subbed in Kuzan and Mighty Bear and they played Karma mid, and it was just not good. But other than that, I think this is a team that started off the season and they were playing really well around the fact that, again, Lava is sometimes a liability in terms of mid lane priority, which is obviously, as we've spoken to, highly valuable. And it's something that aids Xianghwan immensely because, to his point, I also think that Xianghwan has improved into strong jungler, which is kind of surprising given I was pretty unimpressed with him upon debut.
Pretty nice engage sense.
Yeah, I think the problem with the Tigers is that if you're in a best of 5, even if they take games, which I think they're perfectly capable of doing that, I think there's still the issue of if they're playing a team that is also mechanically superior and can play as a unit, even if it's slightly less, I guess, than what the Tigers can play at, that still will bump them up above the Tigers. I still think there's a lot of ways to attack lava in the mid lane. I think there are ways to, even though like I actually value Songyun a lot, I think there are ways to attack him bot side. I think Linderong has played surprisingly well, but again, I think there are also like I feel like you can attack key points of the Tigers that they rely on, especially the mid. And I also think that sometimes they do rely, so they don't have to play this way, but one of their preferred styles throughout this year has been playing around Spellbook and TP. Most famously, in that KT series, we saw them get away with this like bot lane dive with the free Zoe TP, which is like really eye-rolly because obviously like yay RNG in our games, but so I have to give them credit to that, like credit to playing around what they have, but I do think that can only take them so far in the playoffs. Like I don't see this team being, if they make playoffs, I don't see them being able to make finals. I think they could maybe get past that best of 3. So if they start off in like the 4 or 5 position, they can get past that initial like wild card best of 3. I think once they get into best of 5s against the top 3 teams, which I'm assuming still are KSV, KT, and Afreeca, I think that's when you see them having issues. Especially also because they are a team that sometimes likes to all descend at once and 5v5. And if you're looking at especially Afreeca, they will be able to outplay this team in that regard as well.
Okay. The BBQ Olivers are a team who have won a lot of games this season. Obviously, they just beat Kingzone Dragon X. So, what do you make of this team, Cabra?
I mean, that's the series that made me rate them higher because he played a 6 Zoe in, I think it was game 1. He was constantly catching prey and creating plays where there shouldn't be none and winning a game that should be lost. But I think Ignar is really good at flanking, really good at engaging. I didn't particularly like Twch's resets, but they are all right, and he's mechanically talented. I think they get more out of him in BBQ than they did in G2, because I think he's not only talented but also quite an aggressive guy that likes to duel people. But I think Crazy is all right actually, but I don't like the ADC, and I think they have no clue how to play them up once the first turret is down. Like literally no clue. Not even no. Solo queue style, incredibly crazy. Like they were playing this Talia with Zoe, not Talia, sorry, this Kalista with Zoe comp, and they got the first turret, and it's not, I'm not going to say it's easy from their own, but the concept is pretty easy, where you do the same thing you were doing on the bot lane, but on the top lane, and then you use cannon bounces to move to the mid lane and siege it. Once you have the whole outer ring of turrets, you push both lanes, you move into the jungle, you have very good skirmishing and very good peak potential with the Zoe and the Kalista, so you set up, and then you have impossible to fail smite. They are very strong champions on that patch, but they really did not do any of this stuff. They were just kind of looking for fights anyway, and they were starting to fall behind, but I think they got a Q or Zoe Q onto Prey. They turned a Dragon teamfight around, and then they got another once they got Baron, but even then it was looking like trash because they were not setting up any of the side lanes. It was just like, okay, we have Baron, we reset, and we go to one lane. Which lane do you guys like? This is the lane we're playing. Oh fuck, we're getting pushed in. We have to back. Baron is over. I think they had to take didn't they have to take 4 Barons in their latest series, or they took 3 and they lost the game with the 4th.
Against Jin Air?
Yeah, they took 3,
they
right?
won,
and then
but
they lost.
yeah, it was
very fiesta-y. Like, it was terrible.
That entire series felt like a best of 5, even though it was a 2-0 for BBQ. But this is a huge... Oh, no, continue.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say they have a huge side lane problem. They have a huge Baron setup problem. They like to group mid more often than I would like.
Or anywhere, really.
Yeah. And they just... I appreciate the Twch is back because so there was the first series they had with Bono where I thought they were playing around him better, but then after that, it became obvious that they really needed a more veteran presence with more experience in the jungle. So I'm happy that Twch is back. I think he has been communicating with his lanes a lot more, because that was kind of a criticism I had of him when he was on G2, is that maybe his lane communication wasn't as good, and he kind of went off and did the thing where he, again, would just power farm very efficiently and then group with the team to take team fights and objectives. And I think here he, in the past few series, has kind of opened up to ganking a little bit more frequently, or at the very least communicating with his lanes in terms of where to apply pressure earlier. And I think that's really good for this team. But this team is so frustrating to me because they have these really good setup. Like they can have a good setup with the players that they have. And they can organize good fights, and they could be like a team that is knocking on the door of playoffs, and they aren't because they make so many poor decisions in terms of where to group up, how to apply pressure, when they should split pressure, what objectives they should focus on, how to even play around some of their item spikes has been really bad. Like, it's really frustrating for me to watch this team as well. Like, I think this team and KSV are the two most frustrating teams to watch right now in Korea. KSV for the reasons we said, and this team because you see the potential, and they just, like, in that Kingzone series, there was a point where they're like trying to take Baron, and to their credit, they've evolved from doing 50-50s, which is what they were doing earlier in the split. Like, both side lanes are like crashing, and you're just like, why? Like, no, this is not how you do it. Like, stop. And you see a lot of moments like that with this team.
It goes to show to anyone that's a fan of a team that picks up Korean players, and the team says, "Oh, but they're doing English classes, guys. They will communicate. They are a part of the team." They are not. Like, these guys were playing on G2 and Misfits, which were, I think there's a super strong case that they were the smartest teams in Europe with great coaching staffs. G2 had Mithi, who is a famously super smart player, and they both moved to Korea together. They should have pretty good models of the game, and they are playing terribly the map post the first turret. Like, I think they're impressive for how terrible they are, even for, like, it's something I would expect out of, like, famously terrible map play teams like Unicorns of Love or stuff like this. But I don't think it can be overstated how disappointing this is coming from these players that, I don't know, I thought they should have gotten much more from the infrastructure. I think they are individually talented, but it's so sad because the team itself, like, the piece by piece, is super good. This team is actually the team that should be that team that kicks out Rox and KSB and gets into the playoffs, but just by raw talent. But they just can't play the game.
Okay, right. So normally, in a normal season of LCK, I could just say, cool, that's it. No need to discuss all the bottom teams, but we will discuss Jin Air, and here's the reason why. If you can actually beat Afreeca and SK Telecom, you have to at least talk about them. So come on, Cabra, what do you make of the Jin Air team?
My hot take, which I think a lot of people won't like, is that Teddy is the best ADC by form right now in the world. I think he's absolutely sick. I think it must be very nice to be Jin Air's solo lanes because I don't rate them highly at all. I think they're pretty bad. I think Wraith is decent. No, I actually think Wraith is pretty good, especially mechanically, but over-aggressive. And they kind of just, quote-unquote, play for Teddy, but in reality, I think they are just picking winning matchups so that the solo lanes don't lose. And then it's like, okay, if the enemy tries to make a play, they are really good at reading when the play is wrong and when they can punish it. But it's super weird because they are very bad at doing the play themselves. So they will do these weird dives that go nowhere, where someone starts tanking someone starts tanking too early, or they are just all over the place. They are not clearing the wave before starting the dive. It's very confusing, but when the enemy team is executing them wrong, they actually are very good at punishing and very decisive. So this puts them in this weird limbo where they are playing early comps because they are playing winning matchups in both solo lanes quite a lot lately, but they cannot win early because they cannot execute. So they have to pray for the enemy to try to execute something, then punish them and get ahead this way, or maybe just reach the late game and have Teddy just be the god that he is at the League of Legends and carry their team fights. Because against the BBQ Olivers, for example, who really like to just pick full engage and go in this awful series we just saw, they were playing a composition that was completely designed to dive Teddy with a lot of CC, with Ignar, who is a fucking crazy good engager. And even then, Teddy was not only holding his own and even pushing them back in a lot of situations, he was not even playing cleanse. That guy is a fucking monster. It's incredible how good he is, but he's on the wrong team. I can only dream of Teddy in like Afreeca Freecs, for example, but that's not the case. So they hang down there and they stay there.
Has anything changed?
They should have won game one. Can we agree on that? Like, I think a good case study in like Jin Air decision making is just watching that game one against BBQ and how they were able to react to some of BBQ's worst decisions in that game, but then also how they failed to close out the game. They basically died like on the Nexus. It's actually something I'd like
with a huge wave on the top lane.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of Korean teams struggle with this, and I feel like this is in just this aspect. I would like some of these teams to look at what Chinese teams do in terms of when to fight around the Nexus and when to hit the Nexus, because that seems like something a lot of the teams in like the mid-tier of Korea have struggled with. And in this case, Jin Air definitely did not play around that correctly. And I think their second game was they bet on the Allaire being able to again have a good like early to mid matchup, and they messed that up. But then BBQ messed up their like mid to late game as well. It was a very weird 60-minute kind of fiesta of a game where you saw both teams were able to take advantage of each other's mistakes, but then they both kept making mistakes. So go.
Oh yeah, sorry. Please finish first.
Oh no. So I mean, I think that's I guess what's the most frustrating about Jin Air is that even when they have, Teddy popping off and doing really well, they keep making it's always like one moment with Jin Air, like one shining moment, usually around the Nexus, where they lose the game because they make like the wrong call as a team. And I also do think that last week against Afreeca, we saw what they can do, how they can play a bit better around if they have mid lane pressure. But again, that's something that I've harped on Jin Air about, is that if they don't draft around having mid lane priority, and or if Grace just has a bad performance, which is entirely possible, I think that's another huge hole that you have to look at with Jin Air, is that they still struggle to have strong early pressure occasionally because Grace cannot get the push on mid. And there's a world of difference between when he is able to control the middle of the map and when he is not. And that's going to be a consistent, it's something I identified about this team from week one, is that they're going to have an issue with the mid lane because neither of their mid laners, in my opinion, are up to where you'd want a playoff LCK team to be.
Actually, I thought that the Illaoi, in a way, if they thought this reasoning through, was a very smart pick for them, because again, they need kind of winning matchups to be able to not completely into the early game. But also, since BBQ was playing this full dive composition, Illaoi is super good into diving compositions. Even if you can catch Teddy out, get fucked. Illaoi ult into 4 guys, a lot of tentacles, and they were saving a lot of these engages in that manner. So even though they ended up losing, I actually thought this was a super smart adaptation to the initial strategy of diving Teddy, which, to their credit, is something I would also think to do if I was playing against Jin Air, like, kill Teddy, it's over. And therefore, I really like that they identified this and they brought out the Illaoi that made it that much harder, even though they were playing this like Oran Sack, Rakan, and they had a lot of good engages. The Illaoi could just like nullify a lot of that. So I thought that was a very smart adaptation, and I would like to see them play more the Illaoi from the red side if they can get a reasonable matchup.
Yeah, actually, I hopefully you didn't think I was dunking on the Illaoi pick, because I actually did like it as well.
Oh, no,
I think the problem with Jin Air is that I can't rely on them to execute it well.
It's like Illaoi and stomp your lane. Okay, you got fucked. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay. Teddy is so good that you can still be useful on Illaoi just because they have to dive them. So it's a smart pick for the team color, I think.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, TGreb, Jake Petrucci, Yordan Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to get exclusive teasers for my upcoming work? Submit questions for me or make suggestions for my content? Become a part of the ever-growing Scrilluminati via Patreon, link in the description box below.